In today's video, as always, I must start and sit running backs going into week 7 of the fantasy football season. We have been decimated with injuries and even bye weeks. And let's get straight into all the information before I even tell you who you should be starting and sitting this week. Starting off with the bye weeks, the Panthers, the Bengals, the Cowboys, the Texans, the Jets, and the Titans. 6 teams alone. 10 running backs: Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard, Dameon Pierce, Devin Singletary, Breece Hall, Derrick Henry, Tajay Spears. That is 10 running backs alone that are not going to be in your lineup just because they're on bye weeks. Now let's go to the injury list. Okay, running backs that are most likely not going to be playing and or not playing because they're on IR going into week 7. CMC, David Montgomery, Kyron Williams, Ronnie Rivers, James Conner, Khalil Herbert, and Devon Achane. That is the 17 total running backs that you won't be able to put into your lineup going into week 7 of the fantasy football season. And I'm going to try my best to give you as much information, as many running backs as possible. 26 teams, 13 matchups, and over 45 running backs. And I'm going to be going deep, especially into deeper leagues. Hopefully you can have and start going into your week 7 lineups. All right, as always, we love to start off with our Thursday night game. Jags at the Saints. Over under is 39, and the Saints are favored coming into this week. Trevor Lawrence is going to be missed, but at the running back position for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Travis Etienne is a must start coming into this week. Currently RB3 on the year, and he has been averaging over 19 fantasy points per game, which has been really exciting if you have drafted Travis Etienne. And one of the reasons why he has been so successful, in my opinion, is because this passing game hasn't been able to click. You think of Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley not being on the same page, them struggling, but what has been consistent has been Travis Etienne. And that's exactly why he is a must start coming into this week for me for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And his backup in Tank Bigsby, unless you're in a massive deeper league, even if you're in a deep league, I would not suggest to be starting him coming in to this week. Going to the Saints side of the ball, Alvin Kamara is a must start as well. Currently RB 23 on the season, already averaging over 19 fantasy points as well for Alvin Kamara in the first 3 games he has been back, which has been really exciting. Last week, 19 carries on the ground, 68 yards, catching 7 out of 8 targets in the air for Alvin Kamara. Over 17 fantasy points. He is a must start. Yes, the Jacksonville Jaguars do give the 8th fewest fantasy points to the running back position, but he is a vital part of this offense, and that's exactly why he is a must start coming into week 7. And his backups in Kendre Miller, and I know Jamal Williams has been given that window, or going to be given that window to return in the 21 days. Both of these guys I am not starting unless I am in a deeper league when it comes down to potentially a Kendre Miller. All right, going to the 1 p.m. slate games here. And our first game kicking off is the Lions at the Ravens. The Lions are currently 5-1, which I absolutely love. I hope they just go all the way into the playoffs. I mean, I would love them to win the Super Bowl. Shout out to all you Lions fans. Let's start off with the Lions side of the ball. Jahmyr Gibbs looks like he is going to be getting the clear going into week 7. And David Montgomery also looked like he's going to be sitting out in week 7. They're currently saying he is day-to-day with that rib injury. Not necessarily sure, as I'm recording this, if how much time he is going to miss. But once again, currently right now, day-to-day, and things can change. Look, they have to get Jahmyr Gibbs involved in this offense. I know the last time we saw David Montgomery out, we saw Jahmyr Gibbs take this backfield. He really didn't take this backfield. And that was in week 3 against the Atlanta Falcons. Only saw 60% of the workload, 17 carries on the ground for 80 yards. Now, that is exciting, but that still wasn't his highest outing so far in a fantasy season this year. Only 9 fantasy points that week, which still was very disappointing coming in. So I think if you do have Jahmyr Gibbs, you have to start him, because you have to have the expectation that hopefully Dan Campbell and this team is going to be giving him the reins to this offense in the backfield. Now, the Ravens are a good defense against the run, a middle of the pack defense. Not amazing, but it's going to be some struggles for sure. But at least get him work in the air, and I think that's the expectation, especially if you are in a PPR league. You have to hope and believe that he is going to be getting some workload in the air. Now, going to the backup, and a lot of people are saying, what about Craig Reynolds? What is he going to be doing? Well, the last time we saw David Montgomery go down and Jahmyr Gibbs have the opportunity, Craig Reynolds really wasn't there, right? Only saw 29% of the snaps, only 4 carries in week 3 against the Atlanta Falcons. I'm not necessarily sure if you should either be picking him up off waiver wires and or starting him at all going into week 7. So if you are in a 16, 14, even bigger leagues, I'm still not confident in starting him because I'm not necessarily envisioning him having more than 10 fantasy points. And if he does, that is an absolute win for you. So I understand why you have to start Craig Reynolds, but for me, he is a risky start. Going to the Ravens side of the ball here, Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, both of these guys for me right now are risky starts. And they have been back and forth when you think of their production, especially this past week. Gus Edwards seeing 44% of the snaps versus Justice Hill 27. And obviously Gus Edwards out snapping, out carries Gus Edwards into this week. But even like, the week before where you see Justice Hill's having more snaps, more carries, I think this Ravens backfield is just riding the hot hand, whichever one they can get a little bit more involved. But what I do like specifically for Justice Hill is that he's seeing more of the pass catching opportunities. This past week, caught 3 out of 3 targets. This past week, he is getting the workload in the air. And if you want a PPR league, that's exactly what you want. Now he is going against the Detroit Lions, who right now currently give up the fewest fantasy points to the running back position. So if you're envisioning this Ravens defense to run the ball in between the tackles, I don't see that really being successful. I see these guys throwing the ball a little bit more specifically and hopefully to the running back position. So if you do have Gus Edwards, I'm not necessarily sure if I'm excited to start him. That's why I have him as a risky start. And same thing with Justice Hill. If you are struggling with injuries, understand if you have to, but this is where I'll be placing both of these guys going into week 7. All right, going into our third matchup of the week, Raiders at the Bears. 37.5 is the over under, and the Raiders are favored. Obviously Justin Fields looks like he's going to be missing this game as he dislocated that thumb, his throwing thumb, last week in week 6 versus the Vikings. But starting at the Raiders side of the ball, Josh Jacobs, you are starting with confidence, currently averaging just under 15 fantasy points per game. And Zach and I have been preaching you need to buy Josh Jacobs in those first 2 weeks, and now that window has kind of cut off. Currently RB10 on the season right now through 7 weeks. But what was really interesting about Josh Jacobs is currently right now amongst running backs, he is leading them in targets with 35 targets, which is absolutely absurd. Not only that, if I'm not mistaken, he's leading them in yardage as well. So Josh Jacobs is getting the work in the air and also on the ground. No one was expecting that because I just wasn't expecting it. We wasn't expecting him to be leading, at least in the first 7 weeks. If you would have told me that, I would have said that's a bit surprising to me with Devontae Adams there in that offense. But hey, Josh Jacobs, you're starting him with confidence. You're not questioning it going into week 7 against the Chicago Bears, who currently give up the 4th most fantasy points to the running back position. Now going to the Bears side of the ball, Rashawn Johnson with big old Roscoe and Deontay Foreman. Both of these guys right now, I do believe could be good starts. I do have Roscoe as a must start and Deontay Foreman as a risky start. And let me tell you why. Before this week coming in, if Roscoe didn't have that concussion, he would have led this backfield coming into this game, and we would have maybe seen a different sort of offense. We would have seen a different sort of game script with this team. And I do believe when he is healthy, if he is healthy at the moment, as I'm recording this video, he has a concussion and we haven't had information, but if he does practice, that means he is going to be trending in the right direction for week 7. So Roscoe is somebody that I am going to be starting. Not only that, because he can be utilized in the air. We saw in week 1, caught 6 out of 7 targets, had over 17 fantasy points. Tyson may have to dump the ball, maybe screen options, whatever the case may be. He might have to dump the ball to his running back, maybe running a Texas route. Whatever the case may be, that's exactly what it may be. And Deontay Foreman, he is somebody I do believe could be a good start depending on how deep your leagues are. Maybe in a 12-man league and you have Joe Mixon and you had a James Conner and James Conner's out. Deontay Foreman is somebody that you probably picked up and you're saying, hey, you can definitely start him. He's a risky start, but what he did this past week is decent. 15 carries, 65 yards, just averaging 4.5 yards per carry, 6 yards or 6 fantasy points. Not sexy, not exciting, but once again, over 17 running backs not going to be playing going into week 7. Deontay Foreman could be a solid start for you going into week 7. All right, going into my next matchup here, Browns at the Colts, over under 39.5. The Browns are clearly favored, upsetting the San Francisco 49ers this past week. On the Brown side of the ball, you're going to be starting Jerome Ford with some confidence, but if you do need a depth piece, if you're struggling with injuries, Kareem Hunt, who's somebody that finally saw his opportunity this past week, maybe it's due to game script, but he also found the end zone. Over 16 fantasy points, 12 carries on the ground, caught 3 out of 3 targets this past week. Now, Jerome Ford is still leading this team in snaps and carries, but Kareem Hunt could definitely be seeing more of a 60-40 type of workload, which we expected coming in. So you start Jerome Ford with confidence against the Indianapolis Colts, who currently give up the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position. And if you do need a spot start, Kareem Hunt could be somebody easily I would be starting coming into week 7. Now going to the Colts side of the ball against the Browns, who currently give up the 6th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss. What to do with both of these guys? This is what I would say. You start JT because he is your superstar running back, He is somebody that you expect they're going to continue to ramp up. Maybe we'll get the report that the chains are off and Jonathan Taylor is going to be seeing the workload, especially with Gardner Minshew. But what's going to happen with Zach Moss? Zach Moss is still this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, only has 7 carries, right? But he gets 6 out of 7 targets and finds the end zone, scoring 17 fantasy points and seeing 50% of the snap percentages on the field. Where Jonathan Taylor also gets the work in the air, caught 5 out of 6 targets for 64 yards and 8 carries. So essentially, this workload is split, where Jonathan Taylor did see 42% of the snap share as well, but the difference was that Zach Moss found the end zone. So I can see the flip of then happen coming into this week. So you start Jonathan Taylor with confidence, and then Zach Moss. I do believe you started with confidence, but is a risky start if that report comes out saying Jonathan Taylor is a full go and is going to be our lead back again coming into week 7. All right, going into our 5th matchup of the week, Bills at the Patriots. Clearly the Bills are favored with the over-under being 42.5. And at the running back position, I know a lot of people were saying what the hell's happening with James Cook for the last 2 weeks. You start James Cook, man. I don't think you overthink it. He's still somebody that's going to get the workload. This was clearly his worst game in the air, specifically not seeing a target. I also think that this offense was a little bit surprised by the way this Giants team came out. I think the Bills were kind of blindsided, thinking that they were going to be leading this team often and early, but that wasn't the case. James Cook is definitely going to come back and be utilized. He's still very efficient on the ground, one of the most efficient runners in the league so far right now this year. This past game, averaging over 7 yards per carry, 14 carries and 71 yards. Not seeing the field as much as we hope and anticipated, but you expect this team and this offense to be better with James Cook. And then also, I would also say Latavius Murray, a risky start if you are in a 15 or 14-man league. Somebody I will be interested in picking up just because Damian Harris looks like he's going to miss next week. Hopefully he'll be okay. But seeing 49% of the snap share, 12 carries, if you are in a deeper league, Latavius Murray could be a spot start coming into this week. Going to the Patriots side of the ball, where the Bills give up the 9th most fantasy points to the running back position. Mind you, this is a divisional game, so anything can happen in these games. Ramondre Stevenson finally seeing what we all expected him to do, had one of his best games coming into the season. 10 carries, 46 yards, averaging 4.6 yards per carry and a touchdown. Catching 5 out of 6 targets is exactly what you want. 18 fantasy points. He has a big bounce back game now against the Buffalo Bills, where historically, when he did play them, he has been great against the Buffalo Bills. Not great, but good. He's been above average running back against the Buffalo Bills, which you hope does pick up coming into week 7 and continues. Now, his backup in Ezekiel Elliott, he does find the end zone, but getting 7 out of 3 carries, only seeing 38% of the snap share. Not saying that Zeke is irrelevant, and this is kind of what I was saying earlier in the season. Zeke has a role, and what do you need? You have to hope that Zeke finds the end zone, kind of like a Latavius Murray type of role. If you are in a 14, 16, or bigger league, Zeke could be a low-end, middle of the tier RB3 that you're going to say, hey, I'm happy if he gets me, 5 or 5 to 8 to 11 fantasy points coming into week 7. All right, going into our next matchup here, Commanders at my beloved New York Football Giants. Commanders are favored with 40.5 coming into this game. And this one's really simple. You start Brian Robinson, who had a decent game, over 13 fantasy points, finds the end zone, catching 2 out of 2 targets, still a top 15 running back currently. He's RB 15 currently in the season, and that's exactly what you want to see. Living above expectations, what we all expected him to do coming into this year. So you start Brian Robinson with confidence, and Antonio Gibson you are not starting, even though he had somewhat of a decent game. Now going to my Giants side of the ball here, you start Saquon Barkley. He is back, 24 carries, 93 yards, catching 4 out of 5 targets, only getting 13 fantasy points. But how many times they were at the goal line where Saquon could have gotten 2 touchdowns, and he could have been the RB1 this week, but instead he was a top 15 running back. So you start Brian Robinson on the other side of the ball, and you start Saquon Barkley on the Giants side of the ball with confidence. All right, going into our 7th matchup of the week, Falcons at the Bucks, over under 39.5. Bucks are favored coming into this game. Starting at the Falcons side of the ball, you start Bijan Robinson with confidence. Let's not really think about, overthink it. Averaging over 15 fantasy points per game in his first rookie season, or his first rookie season, not multiple rookie seasons. But yes, Bijan Robinson, RB8 currently on the season, is going to continue to do what he does. And now he does have an quote-unquote underwhelming 2 games, but getting under 15 fantasy points against Houston and Washington, but does play a better opponent, a divisional opponent against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where anything can happen. Now the Bucks are a better run defense, but Bijan Robinson, what we do know is he's going to be getting those PPR fantasy points without a doubt coming into this season. He's currently 2nd in targets behind Josh Jacobs, surprisingly, in targets when it comes down to the running back position. So expect him to get the work in the air. And Tyler Algier, as we saw week 1, he pops off, and then you just saw the massive decrease in production, which we all kind of expected. At least Zach and I expected, unless you are a Tyler Algier believer, that he wasn't going to be seeing the opportunities and the workload coming into this season because of Bijan Robinson. He is not somebody that I'm willing... not that I'm not willing to start. I do have him titled as a risky start. If you are in a 14, 16, or even bigger league, there's any given game he can find the end zone. Any given game he can, break for a big run. And if you're okay with 5 fantasy points to 8 fantasy points by someone like a Tyler Algier in one of these bigger leagues, then absolutely. But if you're in an 8, 10 or 12 man league, I am not starting Tyler Algier. And on the Bucks side of the ball, I'm going to be starting Rachaad White. This past week against the Detroit Lions, only 6 fantasy points, only 7 carries, but you have to understand, man, the game script was a little bit difficult for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They weren't clicking on all cylinders, where now the Falcons technically give up the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the running back position. But what's a little bit frustrating with Rachaad White is that they're not getting him involved in the air as much as you hope and wish, and just honestly just expect. He's really only averaging 3 to 4 targets per game, and he has to see more targets than that if he has to be utilized in this offense. But look, you still are starting Rachaad White because he is, unless he goes down, there's no one that is taking opportunity away from him. So you start Rachaad White with confidence. All right, our 8th matchup this week, the start of our afternoon slate games as well. Steelers at the Rams. Over under 43.5. The Rams are favored coming into this game. And what the hell do you do with this Steelers running backs? I mean, Najee Harris has been mid. Jaylen Warren has been mid. Neither of these guys I want to start with confidence coming into this week. But at the same time, what do you need? What type of points do you need coming in? Right? Because in reality, when you look at what the body of work in the first 6 weeks of the season for these running backs, Jaylen Warren has been getting the targets. He's currently, if you look at the targets versus Najee Harris, 25 targets so far this season for Jaylen Warren, and then only 9 targets for Najee Harris in 2023, which is very disappointing. So who has the higher ceiling? It's clearly Jaylen Warren with the targets, and Najee Harris is just not living up to the expectation that we all thought. So what do you need this week? Do you need a high ceiling? Do you need a good even 10 points? Because Jaylen Warren has been getting 10 points in the last 2 games right before the bye week, where Najee Harris only did that once in week 4 against the Houston Texans, where he got 11 fantasy points. So I'm going to be starting both of these guys, as putting these guys as a risky start coming into this week. But if you do need somebody that has a high upside, Jaylen Warren does get the PPR opportunities coming into this game. Going to the other side of the ball are the Rams, and that is Zach Evans, who I am deeming as a risky start. Yes, Kyren Williams is injured. Yes, Ronnie Rivers is injured as well. How long are they going to be out for? I'm not necessarily sure, but I'm not sure if I can trust, I'm not sure if I can trust Sean McVay saying, yep, Zach Evans is just going to be this guy. Zach Evans is going to get the same opportunity that Kyren Williams does. I think you have Puka Nacua, you have Tyler Higbee, you have Cooper Kupp, who all can really spread the ball out. You even see Tutu Atwell emerging as well, and he being fantasy relevant in some way, in some capacity when Cooper Kupp went down. I don't think they necessarily are going to run the ball as much as I expect coming into this game. Now, the Steelers are in the middle of the pack defense against the run, so I don't expect a big game from Zach Evans. But if he does get a 10-11 type of fantasy game for you coming into this week, that is successful. I think anything less than that, depending on how efficient he is, might be a little bit disappointing. So if you're in an 8, 10, or 12-man league, understand if you have to start him. But if you're in a bigger league, I wonder if there's a better option for you coming in. There are so many other running backs that we could be starting, but that could be a whole different conversation in our live streams. All right, going into our next matchup, Cardinals at the Seahawks, a divisional game, 45.5, and the Seahawks are favored. Look, last week we were taken for a ride with this backfield. Keontae Ingram, Amir Demarcado, and then Damian Williams somehow emerged out of the scene, only seeing 17% of the snap share, but seeing 10 opportunities on the field, whether it's on the ground and in the air. And Demarcado barely seeing opportunities, but getting one of the highest snap percentages of this backfield outside of Keontae Ingram. Now, Ingram is clearly the lead back here if he does stay healthy. But if he doesn't, but not if he doesn't, but what we have to understand is that both Keontae Ingram and, in my opinion, Demarcado are going to be the 50-50 split here. We just don't know who is going to be coming into this game. I don't think anyone is. And if someone tells you who they think is going to be, they're probably going to be wrong. Now, the Seahawks are in the middle of the pack defense, but what we do know is that divisional games, anything could happen. Look, both of these guys are risky starts. I understand if you have to start Keontae Ingram and Demarcado, but I'm not starting Damian Williams. I am picking him up off of waiver wires, not spending too much fab on him, just to keep him just in case if we see a bigger workload emerge. But for me, Keontae Ingram and Demarcado both are risky starts coming into this week. And then Kenneth Walker on the other side of the ball. You start Kenneth Walker with confidence here. The Cardinals currently give the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back position. He's currently RB9 on the season, averaging over 18 fantasy points per game. So that's exactly who you start into this week. And then Zach Charbonnet is not somebody that I'm starting moving forward. All right, our next matchup here, Packers at the Broncos. Over under is 45, and the Packers are favored coming into this game. Look, Aaron Jones, if he is healthy, which looked like he is going to be, he had to rest in week 5, then had a bye week. Now he's coming back in week 7 against the Denver Broncos, who currently give up the most fantasy points to the running back position. If there is a good time to buy Aaron Jones, it is right now, right before he plays the Denver Broncos. You start him with confidence, and it looks like hopefully he will be active coming into week 7. I'm not starting AJ Dillon, even though I know he had a decent game. He found the end zone this past week, getting over 13 fantasy points, having his best outing so far in the season. I'm not starting him whatsoever if Aaron Jones does play. Going to the Broncos side of the ball here, Javonte Williams coming back off that injury versus the Kansas City Chiefs, who do have a good defense against the run, but only seeing 10 opportunities on the ground, only seeing 35% of the snap share, where Jaleel McLaughlin sees more snap percentages with 40% of the snaps, 7 carries, just 3 less opportunities on the ground for him. Look, Jaleel is clearly the more explosive running back as of right now until Javonte is 100% healthy. I'm not saying he's a better running back. He's just more explosive and fits this offense, I would say, a little bit more to what they're trying to scheme up for this team. When it comes into Samaje Perine, I am not starting him. I do believe Jaleel has emerged as the backup, and if Javonte does go down, it's going to be Jaleel that's going to be taking the opportunities away from Samaje Perine. Both of these guys are risky starts. Until Javonte is healthy, I can't start him with confidence, but I will start him if I need to. And Jaleel can easily get some workload in the air, which we hope to see coming in against the Packers, who currently give up the 11th most fantasy points to the running back position. All right, our next matchup, Chargers at the Chiefs, a divisional game here. 50.5 is the over-under, and the Chiefs are clearly favored. Chargers side of the ball, Austin Eckler coming off of this game, over 10 fantasy points off this opportunity, but seeing catching 4 out of 6 targets, excuse me. And look, he's going to be better without a doubt. Clearly, the Cowboys do have a good run defense, and so does the Kansas City Chiefs. They give up the 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back position, but we all know how Austin Eckler and these Chiefs operate and Chargers operate when it comes down to a divisional game. So we'll wait and see how that pans out. You start him with confidence, of course, and Isaiah Pacheco, you also start him with confidence because he is currently balling right now. QB running back 12 on the season, averaging over 14 fantasy points per game. He is clearly the lead back coming into this team. And look, everyone else, I think it depends on the team that you're in. If you need a spot start like a Jet McKinnon, I can understand if you start him as a risky start, but I'm only starting him if I'm in a bigger 14, 16-man league. If not, I am not starting Jet McKinnon or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. All right, going into our Sunday night matchup, Dolphins at the Eagles, 52.5. The Eagles are favored, the biggest over-under of this week. Starting at the Dolphins side of the ball, you start Raheem the Dream, who is currently RB2 on the season, over 34 fantasy points, 3 touchdowns this past week, over 15 yards, over 1,500 yards, over 115 yards, excuse me. That was hard to kind of get out there. Averaging currently right now per game over 23 fantasy points per game, which is absolutely absurd for Raheem Mostert. Shout out to him. He's doing his thing, so you start him with confidence. Going to the Eagles side of the ball now, DeAndre Swift not seeing the opportunities on the ground against the Jets run defense. But what we all expect from DeAndre Swift is going back to the air. 8 out of 10 targets, 40 yards, and a touchdown, over 17 fantasy points. Swifty is also doing his thing currently in the season, RB7 right now, averaging 16 fantasy points per game. You start DeAndre Swift with confidence. Kenneth Gainwell, there's no way you can start him with confidence moving forward, so he is a must-sit coming into Sunday night. All right, now going to our Monday night matchup, 49ers at the Vikings. Over under is 44 in this game, and clearly the 49ers are favored. Now, obviously, CMC is going to miss time, and everyone has been asking, who is it going to be? Elijah Mitchell and or Jordan Mason. I think that the community is split right now. I do believe it's going to be Jordan Mason. If there's somebody I'm going to be prioritizing off waiver wires, I do believe it's Jordan Mason over Elijah Mitchell coming into this week, depending on how many weeks Christian McCaffrey does miss. When you look at this offense, and I said this on my waiver wire video, Jordan Mason just looks a little bit more explosive. I wouldn't even say a little bit, a lot more explosive in the way they utilize, and the way they utilize him is well. I think he is going to be getting the opportunities. He also found the end zone in the past 2 weeks against Dallas and Cleveland. If that says anything, that means he gets opportunities in the goal line, where Elijah Mitchell hasn't found the end zone whatsoever this year. He did miss some time, but Jordan Mason, once again, it clearly feels like the more explosive running back that kind of fits that quote-unquote CMC role. Someone that can catch the ball, someone that can run the ball. Not saying that Elijah Mitchell can't do that. Not saying that Jordan Mason is going to pick up all those opportunities from CMC. That's just what I am seeing from the games as I'm watching them. Both of these guys are risky starts coming in. The Vikings do give up the 7th fewest fantasy points to the running back position, so maybe they don't even run the ball as much as we expect. But Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell, both risky starts. Going to the Viking side of the ball here, Alexander Mattison, a risky start as well. Did have a decent game, 18 carries, 44 yards. Not really a decent game, but he did better. He did better in the air. Not a decent game on the ground, but did better in the air. 4 receptions, 7 targets, 11 fantasy points. You're happy with that when it comes down to Alexander Mattison coming into a game like that. And now his backup in Cam Akers, you are not starting him whatsoever. Still hasn't really cracked it. I think this is still going to be You know, he hasn't seen this opportunity, his fewest opportunities so far this year with 16% of the snap share, even worse when he was with LA as well. So you're not starting him with confidence. Both Alexander Mattison a risky start, Cam Akers a must sit. Guys, hopefully that is helpful. Make sure you drop any questions you have down below in the comments. We'll be live every single day answering your start sit questions as always. Hey, we appreciate each and every one of you. And it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.